If you ask most people whether they want more resolution or more field of view, most people will say they want more field of view and ask, why do they keep giving us more resolution? Let me add to this that the best field of view that I've ever experienced was with my valve index that I got in 2019. All the headsets I've had since then have had less vertical and less horizontal field of view. So why has no progress been made or even gone backwards for many years in mainstream headsets? Why are we only now starting to see a few field of view improvements in enthusiast headsets? And what will it take to get a truly wide field of view? Let's start outside of mainstream to get a better picture. Around 2018, a company called StarVR came out advertising the holy grail of optics. They said it had a horizontal field of view of 210 degrees, a vertical field of view of 130 degrees, and 200 degrees of binocular overlap. They used AMOLED displays, 2 DisplayPort cables, and worked with NVIDIA to create custom drivers so you could actually run this at full field of view at 75 frames per second. Not only that, but it had a very thin, lightweight Fresnel lens, and the headset only weighed 450 grams. All right, we've reached field of view nirvana. Why isn't this the end of the story? Well, they got the StarVR headsets into the hands of a few reviewers who generally gushed about it. They said it was an amazing experience with surprising lack of distortion, deep blacks, great colors, but it was delayed and never hit production in a meaningful way. By 2020, I think they were selling development headsets for $3,200, which was considered astronomical at the time compared with most headsets that were selling in the $300 to $500 range. But we did get enough tantalizing reports about these headsets to raise our expectations for the future. And I can't speak for anyone else, but I assumed that they'd have some expensive lens technology or secret sauce that would eventually trickle down to the mainstream. Why didn't that happen? This makes more sense if we look at how the StarVR achieved their large field of view. First, they started with an absolutely huge 5.5-inch diagonal AMOLED display for each eye. Basically, they had 2 smartphone displays. So you can see exactly why these headsets were so huge, or at least part of the reason why. And second, they used advanced Fresnel lenses, expensive to produce. Third, they had a complex distortion profile to map the image across the very large lenses, and this presented a serious load to the GPU for the time. Fourth, they needed a big pipe to move the data, and they used 2 display ports. And fifth, they had custom drivers from NVIDIA. So they could actually run it at 75 frames per second, and it worked. But the resolution wasn't great. It was 1830 by 1464 pixels, or about 2.68 megapixels per eye. Well, sticking with the exotic for a little while longer, VR engineers had a series of wide field of view commercial headsets, starting with the XR Hero 5K and Plus. And they set about 170-degree diagonal with that using aspheric lenses. And then they had the XTEL 8K, XTEL 3, XTEL Neon, and so forth. And they went from having a horizontal field of view to like 150 to 180. And they went from aspheric lenses to patented custom non-Fresnel lenses, which means they've only told us what they're not. They're not Fresnel. Thanks for that. But they were patented. So let's look at the latest from VR engineers just to see what the tippity top of the high end currently is. In December of 2023, they announced the XTEL 3 CAVU, C-A-V-U, with specs that VR dreams are made of. The resolution was 5,320 by 4,600 per eye, or about 24.5 megapixels each. This is nearly 10 times the resolution of the StarVR. This also has high dynamic range with 12-bit color, refresh rates up to 106 frames per second, and it appears a field of view over 200 horizontal, but it's been hard to pin down. To feed those monster displays, they paired it with an NVIDIA Quadro RTX A6000 GPU, which goes up to 48 gigabytes of RAM and costs about $6,000 last time I checked. To get the data to the displays, they used 2 optical cables with a total of 16 lanes of data, totaling 76 gigabits per second. And since this is a military customer and they want mixed reality, they have custom FPGAs. These are field programmable gate arrays that take the video out of the pass-through cameras and bypass the CPU completely and send the mixed reality video straight to the headset with only a millisecond of accuracy. So when you're looking at your hands in your military cockpit, it should absolutely feel real time. So what we see again are large displays, expensive optics, large distortion profiles, a very large pipe for the data, and a professional $6,000 GPU to be able to render the pixels. So let's bring this down to the realm of mere mortals. Running in parallel with these more exotic efforts by StarVR and VR engineers, Pimax entered the wide field of view space with a series of much more affordable, under $1,000 headsets based on the same or similar displays to what StarVR and the early Xtel headsets were using. Now, I'm going to make a key point here. It's easy to buy an off-the-shelf display. It's much harder to design a great lens for it. The lens is where everything hits the pavement. So there were compromises made to create that wide field of view at an affordable price. As a practical matter, the angled displays and Fresnel lenses in each eye were not comfortable for some people. There were some issues with focal distance. Some people were getting headaches. Distortions were reported, etc. People generally needed to modify the headsets to make them more comfortable to wear. And on top of that, the consumer GPUs of the time couldn't keep up. There are large distortion profiles required to reach wider field of views. And this meant that they had trouble rendering full width field of view at a decent frame rate. Now, to deal with this, the Pimax software had a small, normal, and large field of view mode with 120, 140, and 160 degrees. And I remember when most people needed to run in the small field of view mode to get decent frame rates. And then some of them developed a tolerance for low frame rates without getting sick and would use the normal mode. But generally, the headsets were released before the GPUs were actually able to drive the full field of view. Now, today, we can drive them all the way, including the 8KX, which was the last wide field of view released headset. It's not fair to compare these budget Pimax headsets with customers running consumer-grade GPUs to much more expensive headsets running professional-grade NVIDIA GPUs with custom drivers and high bandwidth connections. It's also fair to say that since the exotics never were shipped to the masses, they haven't been subjected to the same scrutiny as Pimax has because they've had more volume. And I have it on more than one source that even the very expensive Xtels have optics that have some issues. So even the absolute most expensive things out there still aren't perfect. So at this moment in time, the only 180 horizontal wide plus field of view solutions have medium to large displays, large high-quality optics, large distortion profiles requiring lots of extra pixels to render wider, massive processing with professional GPUs, a big pipe, or high bandwidth on video cables, plural, and after all that, the optics are still not perfect. So, wide field of view optics are difficult to design and produce, as well as difficult to render and require lots of bandwidth from a PC. We don't see consumer 180 plus horizontal field of view headsets because they are simply prohibitively expensive. And while the Pimax 12K is still vaporware, Pimax had recently said that the ultra-wide field of view headset would require the bandwidth of DisplayPort 2 to be feasible. And we've just gotten this bigger pipe as a feature in the NVIDIA 5090 or the whole 50 series. And while AMD did have DisplayPort 2 capability in their last generation GPUs, they aren't capable of the compute that we need for this. And for what it's worth, the 12K was announced with aspheric Fresnel hybrid lenses. Of interest to this discussion, Meta recently has been working on a 210-degree field of view research prototype headset. This is just a test with. It's not a prototype of anything they plan to release. They say they do care about field of view, but they are not planning to move in that direction because it's simply too expensive. I'll put a link to this article in the video description. The following is a partial quote from the Chief Technology Officer of Meta talking about designing a wide field of view headset. He says, "The trade-offs are so bad. The trade-offs on weight, form factor, compute, thermals, it's all bad. Field of view is one of the most expensive things you can add to a headset. And by definition, all that cost, that quadratic cost, is going to the least important pixels." There are a couple things about this that I find interesting. He's not complaining about having the optics to reach 210 degrees. He's complaining that they'll make the headset too large and too heavy, and he's complaining about the effort involved to render the field of view. Given Meta's massive R&D budget, I'm very curious what their optics are to reach 210 horizontal field of view. I find his use of the term quadratic cost interesting as well. He's suggesting that field of view is an exponential multiplier, more effort and cost for the peripheral pixels on a wide field of view headset. For a standalone headset, the GPU load will mean more heat and higher power consumption and would cut into the runtime on a charge from the battery. And a readily available Snapdragon processor just simply couldn't handle that. And while they have some kind of solution for the prototype, it isn't feasible yet for production. Related to all this R&D, what completely cracks me up is that there are people out there who think that the VR headset manufacturers can give us everything we want right now and are sandbagging and ripping us off. When the reality is, they're pushing technology as hard as they can, and it's not easy to do. Meta demoed some AR glasses recently that cost them $10,000 a pair to make. Just because they can make a prototype doesn't mean the technology is inexpensive enough to be a viable product. So, okay, if they aren't sandbagging, why have we seen field of view stagnate or even drop in recent years? The short answer is the display sizes dropped, and in some cases dropped a lot. And we changed lens technologies. We started with relatively larger OLED, LED, and AMOLED displays with about 3.5-inch diagonals with Fresnel lenses. But we changed technology to higher density, mini LED, and micro OLED displays that have started off smaller, especially the micro OLEDs. Let's get some perspective on these display sizes. Look at how massive StarVR's 5.5-inch AMOLED displays are. And notice the other manufacturers using the same display. There's a reason that these displays were used to create very wide field of view. There was a lot less stretching going on. Under that massive display, notice the mainstream displays in their progression in size from the Vive to the Odyssey to the Reverb G2. With each generation, displays became denser, with more pixels, and smaller. Most people know that the G2 didn't have a very large sweet spot. All these displays from the Vive to the G2 were paired with Fresnel lenses, and the G2 had to stretch the image from a smaller display over a wider area, and the image quality off-centered suffered because of this. Now let's look at our current displays and lens combinations. There currently appear to be 3 separate trajectories running right now. Large mini LED displays with aspheric lenses, mid-sized mini LED displays with pancake lenses, and tiny micro OLED displays also with pancake lenses. The first thing you can see is that there's no Fresnel lenses anymore. Other than HTC, most VR companies have moved away from them. Also, you can see that with Super's 3.5-inch mini LED display, sizes have caught back up with where they were with earlier displays. So looking at the first category with large mini LED displays coupled with aspheric lenses, all are large and heavy headsets. The VR1 with up to 130 horizontal degrees of field of view is currently the widest field of view headset available. because of their expensive two-lens design utilizing a 3.2-inch display. The Super is leveraging a larger 3.5-inch display in a single lens to get up to 120 horizontal field of view. The Crystal falls short in this field of view comparison at only about 104. The second category are the mid-sized mini LEDs coupled with pancake lenses. What is interesting is that both the Quest 3 and Pico 4 have a wider field of view than the Crystal does, at about 108 horizontal, despite having smaller displays. This shows the strength of pancake lenses in terms of working with smaller displays. Also interesting is that both the Quest 3 and the Pico have a decent eye box. Now look at the last category of micro OLED displays for the Big Screen Beyond and the Meganex Superlight 8K. They are absolutely tiny compared to all the mini LED designs. For that reason, your eyes need to be closer to the lenses, eye alignment needs to be better, and there's no room to stretch the field of view. The pancake lenses are still working well for them, but they are currently field of view limited. Micro OLED displays will get larger over time and field of view will come incrementally over the years, but not for a little while. When we moved to these newer, smaller displays, that meant making the lenses for them smaller and the field of view smaller as well. Everything shrank. The good news is that we got pancake lenses that work really well with small displays like the micro OLEDs, and Meta and Pico showed good image quality possible using pancakes on the mid-sized mini LED displays. We also have better aspheric lenses that are getting more field of view out of the same size displays that we had back in 2017. So we're finally seeing incrementally improving field of view for headsets using mini LEDs for the first time in years, partly because the size of the mini LEDs have caught up and partly because of improvements in lens technology. Let's look at these new trajectories going forward. If we scale the aspherics up, they become larger and heavier, which is why the initial Pimax 12K was announced with hybrid aspheric Fresnel lenses, to keep things sharp in the center and then use Fresnel lenses on the side because they can be thin and light. This could extend the field of view without making things too heavy. I have no idea what the final design will be or if it'll ever be produced, but there's a good reason to pick a hybrid approach, at least back when they announced it. Now, pancakes are optically very complex. They effectively act like multiple lenses, and the light reflects multiple times internally, losing light with every reflection before the light you see comes out. They're very expensive to design and the most expensive lens to produce. They also require a very bright display because only about 14% of the display's light actually makes it to your eye. Now, let's look at Hypervision's prototype displays. They have single pancake lenses in the 140 and 160 horizontal field of view range. And they also have a 2 display per eye solution, giving them up to 140 horizontal field of view. But you have to ask yourself, if Somnium has a large stake in Hypervision, why haven't they moved to pancake lenses already with a VR1? It should kind of be obvious that it's cost related. There's more design effort and possibly the availability of very bright large displays. Arthur recently said the VR2 is 4+ years out. So these things don't happen overnight. Aspheric lenses can scale up with larger displays, but they will continue to get larger and heavier and more expensive. So the headsets will eventually become impractical to build. Pure aspheric lenses are the right now lens technology for medium wide field of view, but not for the end game ultra wide field of view. So expect to see more pancake lenses in the future. Meanwhile, micro OLED displays are still too small to compete in the wide field of view arena, but there are still decisions to be made even at this level. The Superlight 8K has larger displays than the Beyond, but they didn't add horizontal field of view. Instead, they added binocular overlap and vertical field of view. The rest of the additional display size allowed for your eyeball to be further away from the lens and made an adjustable generic facial interface possible. Whereas the Quest 3 by comparison has a much larger mini LED display and much larger pancake lenses that allow for a lot more wiggle room between your eyeball and lens. And it allows a generic facial interface to work really well. And they have a wider field of view than both the Beyond and the Superlight 8K because of that additional size. So why do we keep getting higher resolutions instead of field of view? We'll actually start to get both together for two reasons. We've already transitioned to the new smaller high-density mini LEDs and micro LED displays. So now they're starting to increase in size. So even using the same process, when there's more surface area on the die, you get more pixels and brightness. But they also continue to advance the processes, so they get higher pixel densities and additional nits for the surface area, and the surface area is increasing. So we're seeing both pixels and more size. The reality of having a very wide field of view over 180 degrees horizontal anytime soon is not good. The reality is that while companies like VR Engineers have commercial high-end products in this realm, and both Hypervision and Meta have interesting prototypes, consumer ultra-wide field of view headsets are not ready for prime time. Now, some building blocks are appearing. Support for DisplayPort 2 and the NVIDIA 50 series GPUs provides bandwidth, and much needed. So that goes a long ways towards getting the bits to the headset. If we had broad support for efficient dynamic foveated rendering, we might even have enough processing power for ultra-wide field of view, for PCVR anyway. But there's very little momentum there, so for most titles, we really couldn't drive it. We couldn't render the resolution necessary. So in conclusion, we haven't seen very high field of view because it's expensive, hard to produce. Field of view dropped briefly because display sizes dropped and lens technologies changed and needed to catch up. And now we're seeing incremental improvements in field of view, but are not likely to see full human field of view anytime soon because it would be too expensive to produce and the headsets would have too hard a time rendering the required pixels. So VR headset manufacturers are absolutely not sandbagging. Improvements are coming and field of view is starting to increase again. And importantly, we don't need 180 degrees of horizontal field of view to enjoy VR. So we will have more immersive field of views coming that will incrementally increase over time. And hopefully that ride will be fun. Later.